An Iranian airstrike is disrupting a key energy hub once again in the United Arab Emirates this morning. Officials say that another fire has broken out after a drone strike, and operations at the UAE's Shah gas fields have had to be suspended. It is the sprawling port complex that helps energy shipments bypass the Strait of Hormuz. It's been hit at least twice in the last week, and satellite images show the plume of black smoke from a burning oil depot in the port. There's also word of another tanker being hit near the Strait of Hormuz, damage said to be minor. Iran is threatening to target oil and gas tankers from any American allies. There is the question about whether the Strait of Hormuz can be secured in the midst of a war, and if so, how. We've asked the former head of the Royal Canadian Navy to join us, retired Vice-Admiral Mark Norman, now a fellow with the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, David.
I want to ask you, the U.S. Navy is out in force in the broader region. Could it alone, in the middle of a war, secure the Strait?
Well, it could eventually, and I say eventually because ultimately the challenge here is one of time and resources. And even if they were able to put everything they needed into play, it's still an extremely time-consuming process to try and ensure the safety of the channel.
What would actually be involved, whether it's U.S. warships or NATO nations or China, as Trump has asked? What is actually involved in the midst of a war of trying to help get oil tankers and cargo vessels through that narrow, key body of water?
Yeah, so there's really two elements to this problem. There's the above the water problem, which includes both potentially shore-based drones and missiles and small surface craft manned by the Revolutionary Guard. And then there's an underwater problem. And the underwater problem, from my perspective, is the most vexing of the two. And it's the problem of mines. And the problem with mines is that they're extremely difficult to detect. And you don't need a lot of them to disrupt significant shipping, as we're witnessing right now. So that's really the time-consuming part of it. I think, the Americans could continue to attack missile sites and potentially use destroyers and other escorts on the surface to protect from surface attack, although that's a very inefficient and high-risk methodology. The real challenge are the mines on the bottom.
I want to ask you about Canada's military capabilities. Should we as a NATO nation be asked to participate in some sort of mission before or after this war in the Strait of Hormuz? Are Canadian warships equipped to deal with both the above the surface and below the surface threats?
Well, our frigates, which are our primary warships at this point while we're building new ones, have some fairly robust capability to deal with surface and air threats. So they could perform an escort function, although, as I said a minute ago, I do not believe that that is a particularly useful and appropriate methodology. But as it relates to the mine countermeasures capability, we have a very, very limited capability in that regard. We have a number of people who are trained and qualified. We have some remote operated vessels, basically underwater robots, and we would have in previous scenarios been part of Allied and NATO planning for this kind of thing, but we don't have a lot to offer, and it would have been part of a larger coalition contribution, which I think is increasingly off the table as this evolves.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, in the words of Germany, they're almost saying, we didn't cause this, so we're not going to try to solve it. This is not our war. Is that, in your mind, just the approach that will be taken by American allies and others being asked by the president to become involved?
Sadly, yes. And I say sadly because it's a reflection of how fractured the system of international relations is at the moment. And it's entirely accurate. From a political perspective, this is a ridiculous notion that the Americans would create this problem and then call on their allies, who the president himself is continuously insulting, and ask them to jump in and help out. And from a military perspective, this would have been a known quantity in the planning process. And for anyone to pretend that this is a surprise, they're either idiots or they weren't paying attention. And so it's a bit of a stretch to try and cobble together the military capability. There is some very robust military mine countermeasures capability within many of the alliance nations, but I think that there's no real goodwill being applied to this circumstance, and I think it's just a mess.
President Trump did say he is surprised and says all the experts involved were surprised that Iran would target their Gulf neighbors.
Okay, I don't know which experts he's referring to, and to be honest, I don't really trust anything that comes out of President Trump's mouth. So my view as a military professional, retired, is that the military planners in CENTCOM and elsewhere in the Pentagon would have seen these scenarios playing out, and whether the advice was ignored or the risks were assumed to be less significant than they are, it doesn't matter. We are in the mess we're in, and there's not really an easy military solution to this problem. And Iran is going to continue to do what they're doing, as you said in your earlier reporting. They're going to continue to disrupt not just the shipping, they're going to continue to make it difficult for alternative paths to be used. And this is classic asymmetric warfare, and at the moment, the Iranians have the advantage, notwithstanding all of the drama and reporting of attacks and losses up to this point. This is where, to put it bluntly, the rubber's hitting the road.
Admiral O'Norman, really appreciate your expertise. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, David. Have a good day.
You too.